You grew up in a small town. How did you first become interested and fascinated with the skyscrapers?
I have never imagined when I was growing up, or even when I was studying architecture in my hometown in Tucumán, that I was going to be designing skyscrapers. I didn't even dream that I would be working in the United States. But I was very much taken with architecture. I was taken with its artistic possibilities and with the social value of buildings. Coming to the United States was just a lucky accident, coming with a scholarship for 9 months, and thinking indeed that I was just married, came with my wife, thinking that after 9 months we'll return, but we didn't. And on skyscrapers also, it just happened that I was indeed working here. I was started to get very interested in the aesthetic and symbolic problem of very tall buildings. I have always been impressed with how well both the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building express the nature of a skyscraper in their time. I think they are unusually successful buildings.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think people are striving to build high?
It's a good question. And I have read many explanations. My personal feeling is that it comes primarily from the way we human beings are made, that we are this very vertical thing, and very curiously, a very peculiar design in this very tall and thin thing. Our eyes, which is how we communicate with the world mainly, are way at the top. Very, very, very strangely placed as a design. And I believe that this uniqueness of the human beings, of being vertical and moving vertically around, and the relationship of the human being alive and in movement against the horizon line that is static and not living, it conditions the way we see things and perceive things.
Many modern skyscrapers pursue missing flat topped, rational and ideal vision.
Yes.
What is your critique of his reductive high rises, and what did you learn from them?
I believe that those buildings that pursue the Messian flat top are not skyscrapers. For me, they are high-rise buildings. It means very strongly did not want his buildings to be called skyscrapers.
Oh, okay.
He called them high-rise, and he was right, because skyscraper conveys other values and meanings that he was not interested in. So immediately, skyscraper needs to deal with what does this mean, the symbolic, and that, of course, for such a rationalist architect as me, this was anathema. But the skyscraper, and indeed, if the buildings are not the very tallest in a city, they are perfectly fine. And high-rise buildings is indeed what makes most sense to build. And interestingly enough, all of Mises buildings fit well in their places. Particularly his buildings in Chicago, mm-hmm. the Federal Building, are very, very well placed, very well proportioned. Mm-hmm. Even Seagram's on Park Avenue, the only setback building as he imagined it, fits very well on the avenue, but not as skyscrapers. See, as you are a few blocks away, you don't know which one is the Seagram's building, no. And you don't care. And
it blends in.
Exactly, but many, many blocks away, actually, you can see it from the train, from across the East River, from Queens or Long Island City, you can tell the Chrysler or the Empire State.
And you know that you are
unquestionably. You know where they are, you know what place they mark in the city, You see the Chrysler building, you know the Grand Central Station is there, which is very, very, very nice. So that it depends where the building was. For me, a skyscraper, to even pretend to be a skyscraper, needs to be quite a bit taller than the surrounding buildings. Or having been built in a situation where it was quite a bit taller than the surrounding buildings. Now, of course, the Chrysler building has been overtaken, but for many years it was much taller than anything that surrounded it.
Yeah, yeah. And even today in the immediate neighborhood, you always see
absolutely,
it.
very, very visible. Absolutely.
Yeah. What architect did you learn from the most?
Well, for me that's easy, because it's Rosarinen, because I work so closely with him and question.
10 years, right?
Yes, he's the architect from whom I learned the most personally. Perhaps the greatest influence is Le Corbusier in general, like everybody else of my generation. But as a personal master, it was Rosarinen.
And why? What would you distinguish in
what I learned from him is it's a love for architecture, discipline in work, concern for how the building fits in a place, how it relates to other buildings, and a certain humility in how you approach the project. Doesn't mean that you need to be humble person, but it's a humility in the approach of the to the project that I think is essential in any good architecture. It was very, very critical for me. But it's more than learning lessons. It was just sharing a way of doing things until it becomes my own, adapted to my own personality.
What words would you choose to describe your architecture?
Well, I like to think that my architecture, I like to say sometimes it's an architecture of response, which is, I believe, all architecture should be. And I think it has been through the ages, except in the last 100 years or so. That is, we as architects don't invent what to do, but we respond to specific problem in a specific place for specific people. And it is to us to interpret that problem technically and emotionally, and to give the groups that have engaged us a building that will function well, where they can somehow enjoy life more fully or produce more effectively, and also, if we are lucky, make it into a work of art. That's the opportunity that is inherent in almost any project, that somehow, if we are good and if we are lucky, they can aspire to be art. But that is not essential. That is an extra bonus. The essential, which I think there is great confusion today, because that has been put as a primary objective, which is the primary objective we have is to respond to our responsibilities fully, which may and often does not include making a work of art. We add that to it.
So it is okay for some buildings or even most buildings not to be a work of art?
Actually, it's better if most buildings don't try to be. When you visit some of the great cities in Europe particularly, or some great pieces, I was just walking through some old streets in Kyoto, which are also extremely beautiful. And all of this, you find a great coherence, extremely well-designed building, very appropriate, mostly using repetitive things. There's a great deal of imitation going on, which is very healthy. And only exceptional buildings, usually buildings exceptional by the use. If you are in Paris, you expect indeed a great cathedral. Notre Dame is very different than the surrounding buildings. But you go through any ordinary street in Paris, in the center. The suburbs of Paris are another whole other story. But in this whole city of Paris, the whole center of Paris, which is still late 19th century and the 20th century city, there is just great pleasure in those streets without any building that is trying too hard to be a work of art. But they are all trying to be appropriate,
Part of a bigger
sensible, they fit, they complement each other, they make for a harmonious whole, and the whole is much more important than any of the parts.
Many of your buildings are contextual, symbolic, and carry historic references. How does all of this relate to postmodernism, and what is your critique of it?
Well, see, postmodernism was a movement that grew very fast and was accepted because it had at its kernels some very valid ideas. It was starting with Venturi's complexity and contradiction, which Venturi never accepted being a postmodernist, but indeed he was the first to voice those ideas. Well, not necessarily the first to voice them, actually. Saarinen was voicing similar ideas. He was the first to write about them in a very coherent manner. Same as Le Corbusier did earlier with Verse in Architecture about modernism. Venturi did it in complexity. So to me the most important thing of this is a critique of modernism. What's modernism lacking? And indeed what was first was lacking a sense of concern for the past, concern for surroundings, concern for how actually truly people live and function, concern about many other needs besides the basic bodily needs of a person, accepted all of our foibles, and realize that the building is a piece in a larger whole. Those are very, very valid ideas. Unquestionably, very quickly, many people took those ideas and used them as an excuse to do pastiche, very ugly jokes of buildings. And it's a shame that it was hijacked, really, because there was much of value in the post. And the interesting thing is that has not died. Now, the interesting thing is that there are many, many architects that still practice with those same values, but it doesn't have the same popular support that it used to have.
I think from the public there is still a support, but there is a lot of criticism from...
Nobody will say I like postmodernism today, but public indeed will like traditional buildings, yes.
Recognizable images.
Absolutely, and they will appreciate buildings that fit in their surroundings. Public and many institutions, many universities today, in some ways, because of reaction to the modern buildings now, what they want is truly historical buildings, which is a great pity. But many universities look for buildings that will fit in the context and will not destroy the nature of their campus and the image of their campus. So that many of those lessons have been learned. They are still active. There are a very large number of architects that practice with those ideas, but it's not this overwhelming movement, and unquestionably it does not receive the critical attention that more individualistic modern buildings do.